Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2. Hopefully, I didn't tire you out too much on day 1, although I did want to give you a fair amount of work to just sort of reinforce the fact that this is a university prep course. And we are asking a lot of you. I know that, but for those of you who reached the bar, well done. For those of you who didn't log in yesterday and are logging in for the first time today, you'll see that you are considerably far behind. You've missed 3 days of class already, so chop chop, get caught up. Yesterday, you learned 100 new terms, although hopefully most of those weren't new terms. If they were new terms, I don't know what was happening in your grade 9, 10, and 11 English classes. But now you know those terms, and then in the second part of the lesson, you applied those to a work of poetry. Hope you enjoyed Sound of Silence. Third part of that lesson, you were introduced to some criticism. If you're not really understanding all of those literary theories, don't worry too much. It's enough just to understand that they exist and to get your feet wet with them right now. Trust me, they're going to come up over and over again. You're going to get better and better at using them and understanding them if you are trying to. So don't worry too much about that. Some feedback from yesterday. For those of you who sent me email, for those of you who made posts on a forum, and for those of you who submitted work, in general, I was happy with the writing that I saw, but I do want to point out that a few of you were using a very informal tone when you were communicating, and I would like you to just remember, this is a university prep English course. We practice perfection here. So for those of you who use lowercase I in your writing to refer to yourself, for those of you who write in massive run-on sentences, and for those of you who didn't check your spelling before you submitted something, please make sure that you take a little bit of extra time and work those things out of your writing. Okay? You should never make little mistakes like that. So today's lesson, that's going to appear backwards to you, apparently, is on Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet laureate for half of the 1800s. He was a great poet, kind of controversial in a way because a modern poet or a modern critic would maybe look at Tennyson as being a bit too childish in his poetry. I'm going to make reference to James Joyce. James Joyce created a character named Stephen Dedalus that he used in several of his great works of writing. And Stephen Dedalus doesn't even consider Tennyson to be a poet. But I think he's a great choice because his writing, it suits the purpose for today. And he wrote a lot of poetry. It was written very well. I think he does deserve to be in the canon of English literature for sure. He's not one of my favorites, but he used to be one of my favorites. Today, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to figure out the literal meaning of a poetic text. So I'm going to use Mariana. I'll read for you a few lines of it. With blackest moss the flower pots were thickly crusted, one and all. The rusted nails fell from the knots that held the pier to the gable wall. The broken sheds looked sad and strange. Unlifted was the clinking latch. Weeded and worn the ancient thatch upon the lonely moated grange. She only said, my life is dreary. He cometh not, she said. She said, I am aweary, aweary. I would that I were dead. So that was kind of a terrible reading. Why? What was wrong with my reading of that text? Well, as you'll see when you read through the whole thing yourself, because this is going to be in the course notes, you're going to see that this is a poem about a young lady who is waiting for a lover who never shows up. The tone of it is not nearly as light. So the lighthearted tone that I used to read with didn't suit the literal meaning of this text. If I wanted to suit it, it would probably sound more like this. With blackest moss, the flower pots were thickly crusted, one and all. The rusted nails fell from the knots that held the pier to the gable wall. The broken sheds looked sad and strange. Unlifted was the clinking latch. weeded and worn the ancient thatch upon the lonely moated grange. She only said, "My life is dreary, he cometh not," she said. She said, "I am aweary, aweary, I would that I were dead." Now, I might have emphasized that a little bit much, but you get the point, that the way that you read the poem should suit the literal meaning. Whenever I approach a piece of poetry, I'm a literature guy. I do like to analyze things, but I don't want to, analyze the fun out of a piece of poetry and go through every particular detail, pick out every literary device. I want to find a nice happy medium. My first step is to figure out what is the literal meaning of this work. Now, this is the approach that I would use when looking at any new piece of literature. Start by figuring out what it means on the surface before you try to figure out what it means underneath. So, To Kill a Mockingbird. On the surface, it's the story of a court case. Lord of the Flies, on the surface, it's the story of a group of boys who are stranded on an island and try to take care of themselves until they get rescued. Right? Mariana, on the surface, is the story of a girl who's waiting for a lover who never shows up. And that's basically what the poem is about. So for this activity, you're going to walk through The Passing of Arthur, which is one of Tennyson's poems from a collection of poems, an epic actually, called The Idylls of the King. It's about King Arthur. If you have some background understanding about King Arthur, that's great. Really, what you need to know is that he was a pretty epic king himself, and he ruled over a kingdom out of a place called Camelot, and he had the Knights of the Round Table who were all loyal to him, and he went on quests, most notably to try to find the Holy Grail, which apparently got hidden in England. So you're going to walk through it in a deductive reasoning kind of way, which means you go through from the top, going down, you pick out details, and you put those details together to compile the literal meaning of the poem. Then, in lesson 2B, you're going to move on to the underlying meaning, or the figurative meaning of the text. So once you figure out what the story is on the surface, you dig a little bit deeper, and you can find some more meaning. So for example, Lord of the Flies is a story about boys on an island that has nothing to do with the boys or the island. What you find out when you dig deeper is it's about civilization itself, and it sort of shows us that unless something changes, our civilization is doomed to fall because of the way that it's made up and of basic human character faults. The same thing goes for Mariana. It's the story of a woman who is waiting for a lover who doesn't show up, but even more than that, what Tennyson does is he conveys to us the insanity of loneliness. So for those of you who have ever felt lonely, if you've ever waited for somebody and you know that they're not showing up, you know that they're not going to show up, but you keep waiting for them, really what you're doing is insane. You're locking yourself into a prison, in a sense. It's a prison of your own creation. Mariana knows, it's very clear from the beginning, she knows in deep down that Angelo is not going to show up, and yet she waits, and she spirals into a depression. Her faculties start to fail her. She might even be going insane, and yet she still waits for this guy. But this guy is an awful guy. He is a terrible guy. If you read Measure for Measure, you would know. Angelo is the antagonist of the story. He's a really awful character, and yet she's waiting for him. The whole situation is insane. But I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to. If we have ever waited for somebody knowing they're not going to show up, or if we've ever pined after something that really it wasn't good, but we wanted it to be good, we hoped that it would be good, and then we hoped that it would work out for us. What Tennyson is showing us with Mariana is that's completely insane. So there's the underlying meaning of that poem. You're going to look at The Lady of Shalott, which is another very famous poem by Tennyson. and you're going to read it first to try to figure out what the literal meaning is, but then you're going to dig deeper to pull out the underlying meaning. And this is where you're going to use your understanding of literary terms and devices. You're going to apply those to the text. Have a look and see at the way that I do it. So for the course notes and the instruction for this lesson, what I've done is I've created exemplars for you, and I've shown you how I analyze Mariana, use my style, learn from me, and analyze the Lady of Shalott. So for the third part of this lesson, lesson 2C, you're going to be applying the literary criticism and theory that you learned yesterday to help pick out even more meaning in this poem. Well, not this poem. You're going to be looking at a choice of poems. For Mariana, though, what I did, you'll see with my exemplar, is I used all 6 of the theories and I applied them to different stanzas. Now, you don't have to do that. What I'm looking for is sort of like a nice progression. Remember, I don't want you to try to earn marks or try to impress me by doing a lot of something in a way that's not really good. I would much rather that you could take a couple of these criticisms or a couple of these theories and apply them well. That shows me progress. If you can apply a couple of these now on day 2 of learning about this stuff, by the end of the course, you'll be able to apply all 6. So as an example, I want to look at the second stanza of this poem, and I'm going to approach this through the eyes of a feminist as best as I can. I'm not a feminist, so this is a bit challenging for me, but please bear with me. So the second stanza, her tears fell with the dews at even. Her tears fell ere the dews were dried. She could not look on the sweet heaven, either at morn or eventide. After the flitting of the bats, when the thickest dark did trance the sky, she drew her casement curtain by, and glanced athwart the glooming flats. She only said, the night is dreary, he cometh not, she said. She said, I am aweary, I would that I were dead. As a feminist, I'm not all that impressed with Mariana as a character. I'm looking at her and thinking that she is a male author's caricature of what a woman really is. Think about it. She's stereotypical here. She's crying all day and all night. That hyperbole goes beyond poetic hyperbole and into the realm of the ridiculous. That she is going to cry all day and all night, it's just not realistic. If she was a real woman, she would be feeling more than just sadness right now. If somebody had abandoned you, would you feel only sadness? Wouldn't you feel some anger in there? Wouldn't you feel some jealousy maybe? Wouldn't you feel some disbelief? Wouldn't you feel something other than just like overwhelming sorrow that calls you to, to cry all day? Let me give you another example of how somebody would approach it. As an existentialist, I would be totally unsurprised that Mariana is feeling that her life is dreary, because Mariana's life is very much dreary. She doesn't even exist in the pure sense of the term. Mariana is living in a prison, and that prison has been created for her by somebody else. It's been created for her by Angelo. She's there under his authority. And the worst part is, it's not even because he's jailed her, but because she loves him for some reason, or she feels that society has created a role for her where she needs to marry somebody of his class. And so she sits there and she waits for him. As an existentialist, what I see here is this is the story of somebody who doesn't even exist. Their life is completely meaningless, and that's to me what the meaning of the story is. As always, make sure that you get in touch with me. Send me an email if you need any help. I'll be in my office from 9 until 12. And other than that, I guess all I can say is get to work.